You want to try my computer?
Oh, I think it just worked.
Okay.
Okay, hello. Sorry about that. For some reason, it wasn't working just now, and I was freaking out. Okay, good morning, everyone. Aiden just wanted to say hello. Do you want to say hello to everyone? Say hello. Say hope you're doing well. All right. Say looking forward to seeing you.
All right.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye, Aiden. Okay. Thank you to everyone who's joining us. You know what? I wanted to do it on YouTube, even though I know Zoom has been working out better for us. But just because on YouTube we're able to record it, so that way we're able to, people can watch it later. Okay, I want to talk about the title that we have over here is the differences between a large Seder and a small Seder. You know what, let me just... Okay. All right, lighting should be better. Okay, so we're going to discuss a very relevant topic over here, which is when people have a Seder, which is, one or two people. What is different about that than other years? Obviously, this is a topic that I think a lot of us are thinking about. A lot of people are worried about. So I wanted to sort of see what sources we have, what our classical sources, what insights they have to share with us about this, and what we're able to, how we can try to make sense of it for this year. Sorry, I want to get the lights on over here. Oh, there. Okay. Okay, so let's begin over here with, we actually have quite a few sources. This is Shabbos HaGadol. Obviously, we would try to do this on Shabbos usually, Shabbos afternoon. This year we are stuck doing it and virtually here on Sunday morning. But either way, we're going to try to keep the same format. And that is that usually at the Shabbos HaGadol, we try to talk about halacha, about some Jewish laws related to Pesach. And we also try to get into some of the theology, some of the ideological parts of the Pesach. So we're going to try to do the same thing. Let's begin with some halachic discussion about guests at the Seder. All right, so we actually have, interestingly enough, a very authoritative discussion about the need for guests at the Seder. And this begins with a comment of the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, who is one of the great medieval halachic authorities. And it's quoted by his son, the Tur, who was also one of the great halachic authorities. So the Tur says the following: mitzvah lachzor achar zimun. There is a mitzvah. There is a special commandment, or we try very hard to have a zimun for the Seder, right? A zimun is, of course, 3 adult Jewish men. All right, so we try very hard to have a zimun at the Seder. And where does this come from? V'hachi itmar b'medrash Tehillim. That's what it says in the medrash of Tehillim, that hakorim es hahalel tzarich sheyihu shlosha sheyehi echad omer lashnayim hodu. All right, that when you read Hallel, you should try to have at least 3 people, so that one can say to the other 2, right? There's parts of the Hallel, the Hodu parts, when we say them responsively. The cantor says one line and then the people repeat it. So in order to say that responsively, we want to have at least 3 men, all right, a zimun, adult men, so that one can say it and the other 2 will respond. All right, that's the rabbis, that's a rabbinic tradition in Medrash Tehillim that's quoted by the Rosh and the Tur. And the upshot of that is that in order to say Hallel properly at the Seder, we need at least to have 3 people there so that one can respond to, or 2 can respond to the other one. Says the Tur, V'kasav Adoni Avi Harash Zal V'lo Nohagu Kain. The Rosh disagreed with that. The Rosh said you don't need 3 people at your Seder. V'imishum Hodu Lomar B'shlosha Sagi B'ishto Ubanav Shehigiu Lachinu. All right. What about what about saying Hallel with responsively with 2 other people? So the Rosh said that's okay. You don't need 3 adult men for that, because the man of the house can lead it, and his wife and children who are not adults, his sons who are not adults, can respond. All right. So long as he has a 10 or 11 or 12-year-old son, then he can respond. All right. So we have a debate over here between the Tur or the, let's say, the Midrash Tehillim, which says that you should try to have at least 3 adult Jewish men at a Seder in order to say the Hallel responsively. The Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, disagrees, and he says, no, you don't need that because even if you don't have 3 men, you can say it with women, you can say it with the children, even if they're not bar mitzvah, they're not adults, so long as they know what they're saying. They're 8, 9, 10, they know what they're saying, that's good enough. Okay, so we have a debate over here over this issue. Now, obviously, for this year, this is not going to help us, this leniency, so to speak, of the rush, because we have a lot of people who, even with them and their spouse, some people don't have children in the house. We have people who are going to be doing the Seder alone or just 2 people. So even the rush or only allowed this when you have other people in the house. You have 3 people in the house, but obviously this year some people are going to be celebrating the Seder with less than 3 people, with 1 or 2 people. All right, so we'll come back to this, but that's our first source. All right, again, it's just worth keeping in mind that we never have laws about inviting people for a Shabbos meal or a Sukkot meal or a Rosh Hashanah meal or other festive meals. We talk about inviting poor people as a favor to them, but we never talk about inviting people for your sake, for the host's sake. But at the Seder, it's very important. That's the one time we find in the halachic sources that for your own sake, it's important to have guests. Okay. Now, let me just run through some of the later development of this. The Ramah, all right, the main Ashkenazi authority, in his glosses to the Tur, he says that our custom is to try and have a zimun. Okay, so according to the Ramah, the Ashkenazi practice is to try to have 3 men at the Seder. The Magen Avram and the Taz, who are 2 of our most important later authorities, they comment on this as follows. They agree with the Tur that the reason why you need a zimun is for the Hallel part. Okay, and they point out that based on this, you don't actually need your guests to eat. Okay, so we're not talking about real guests over here who join you for the meal. But what you could actually do is, let's say you've done your whole Seder. You ate the matzah, you ate the maror, you ate your meal. You basically finished the whole Seder, right, all by yourself. And then you could invite 2 people to come join you for Hallel, just for the end, right? The last part basically is Hallel. Those people could come and join you just for Hallel. So they don't have to eat with you at all. These are not the eating guests. They're just people who say Hallel with you. So presumably, and I'm not encouraging this at all, but presumably if the people wanted this year, if they wanted to try and fulfill this aspect of the Seder, according to the Magen Avram and the Taz, you could set up to, with some of your neighbors that you're going to do your whole Seder by yourself, or with 1 or 2 people. And then when it comes time for Hallel, you're going to meet up, somewhere on the street, somewhere a lot of open space. You're going to stand far away from each other, and you're going to say the Hallel for a few minutes together. You'll do the responsive parts together. All right, that's a position number 1. Now, there is a second position, a disagreeing position over here, and that begins with the Prisha. All right, the Prisha is an important commentator on the Tur, and the Prisha tells us that no, the reason why you need a zimun, the reason why you should try to have 3 adult Jewish men is not for Hallel. Okay, so everything we've been talking about up until now is for the Hallel part of the Seder. The Prisha says, you know why you need 3 adult men, a zimun, for the benching. Okay, now how does he get there? So there's a halacha that when you bench, you should use a cup of wine or grape juice. Okay, and at the Seder night, of course, we all do this, right? Even those of us who, for the most part during the year, don't use a cup of grape juice for benching. But on the Seder, we do it. It's the third cup of wine. And if we didn't use a cup at the Seder, we'd have a problem because we wouldn't have the 4 cups of wine. Now, when it comes to the obligation to bench with a cup of wine, so there's a major debate, and some authorities hold that you don't ever need that. All right, that's why some people don't ever use a cup of wine for benching. Some authorities hold you need always to do it, even if you're by yourself. And then there's a third position, which is if you're by yourself benching, you don't need a cup. But if you have a zimun, if you have the 3 people, then you do need a cup. Okay, so those are the 3 positions. Now, the Prisha said that he heard one of the reasons, or the reason why we try to have a zimun, again, right, 3 men for the Seder, is in order to make sure that that cup of benching is obligatory. All right, in other words, we're concerned that if we don't make benching using a cup obligatory, then we might miss out in some way on using the third on the third cup of wine. So therefore, we try to have a zimun for the benching part. Forget about the halal, for the benching. Okay, now this is a bit of a bigger stringency because according to this position, you can't just invite these guests to join you for halal, like we just said, but you'd actually have to eat with them, right? You'd have to invite them for the meal, which is something that we are strongly discouraging this year, people getting together for a meal. So this year we'd have, a problem. I mean, we'll see if this is a big problem or a small problem, but we would have a problem over here because you cannot invite or you shouldn't invite the zimun for benching. The Netziv also is a later commentator. The Netziv was the head of the yeshiva in Volozhin, and he has a Haggadah called the Imrei Shefer, and he takes the strongest view over here. He believes that according to the Talmud, you really need a zimun. You need 3 men for the benching, and that is his position over here. So according to the Netziv, the reason why we need guests at the Seder is for the benching, to make sure that we need a cup. Otherwise, he's concerned that if it's just 1 or 2 people, that you don't need a cup. You don't need to bench on a cup, and then you might miss out on the obligation of the 3rd cup at the Seder. Okay, so that's our debate so far. Again, we have the Tur saying that we need a zimun. The majority of the authorities here hold that it's for halal, so you don't need to invite them to eat. The Prisha and the Netziv believe that it is for the benching in order to make it obligatory to have a cup. So you would need to have them eat. Okay, now let's see what the Mishnah Berurah says. And then I want to go into some of the more ideological parts of this. The Mishnah Berurah tells us the following. All right, the Mishnah Berurah basically sides. I want to read a little bit of this. He basically sides with the position that the need for guests is for halal. Okay, that's his basic position over here. And then he says, of course, that we're not that strict about this. So, if you can't say the Hallel, with the guests, then you'll just say it with the people in your house. We'll come in 30 seconds to what happens if it's just one person or 2 people, right? What do you do at that point? But the Mishnah Berurah points out over here, I just want to read this thing. He says that, but there is a nice idea to invite guests over here. The Mishnah Berurah says that, look, it's a good thing to try to have a zimun for benching, right? Even though he believes it's really for halal, but it's good to have a zimun for the benching. And the yira lahazmin lechatchila lasuda eza orel. So you should really try to invite a guest to your meal for the Seder. And on the bottom here in the Shara Tzion, which is his comments, he quotes from the Zohar, that the Zohar says that you should always try to invite a poor person to your Seder. And then he says that, of course, at the beginning of the Haggadah, we extend this invitation, right? In Halach Ma'anya, we extend this invitation. So that's further indication that inviting guests to your Seder is a very integral part of the Seder. If you go to the KI YouTube channel, we have on there a discussion of the first part of the Haggadah, where we quoted from other commentators, the Masa Nisim and other commentators who believe that the invitation at the beginning of the Haggadah is not a real invitation. It's a statement that we make for other reasons. But obviously, the Mishnah Berurah believes that it is a real invitation. The literal reading here is that it is a real invitation. And so we see from all these sources, from the Zohar, from the Haggadah, from how we begin the Haggadah with an invitation, that it is important to invite guests to our Seder. Okay, so to summarize this, or to bring it to make it relevant to our year, we do have very strong sources here that are pushing us to invite guests to our Seder. And that's probably a good part of the reason why in normal years we always try to invite guests to our Seder and to have big Seders together. But of course, this is not a normal year, and none of this in any way displaces our need to stay healthy and to stay safe, of course. The Hallel, of course, can be said by yourself or just with another person. If it's by yourself, it won't be responsively. We try our best to do it responsively. But certainly this year, better to say Hallel by yourself than to risk anything. The benching also, even though some positions hold that the benching should be done with other people, none of that certainly displaces any of our health concerns this year. And the benching can be done also by yourself. Okay, so practically, even though we have all these sources pushing us to invite people, we'll hold off on that for next year. Hopefully next year we'll do huge Seders to make up for this year. But this year you can do the full Seder completely, even if you're by yourself. And that's probably that's for many people the best way to do it. Okay, now let me just note about this, just one interesting fact. This isn't really quoted in halachic books, but there are certain books who encourage us to not just have 3 people, but to have a full minyan. Okay, so to try to have, which would mean 10 men. I mean, this would be a huge, really a huge Seder, because you imagine with men, women, children, it's going to be a huge group. There's a book, the Siach Yitzchak, and he bases this on the fact that the Talmud tells us that when they used to do the Pesach offering, all right, the Korban Pesach, so they used to have at least 10 people for every Korban Pesach. So based on that, he says that you should try to have a minyan at your Seder. Now, I'm not exactly sure. The Talmud, it seems to me clear, does not mean 10 adult men. It means 10 people, men and women. So I don't know. I'm not sure how he gets to have 10 adult men. If anything, I think it should be just to try to have a Seder with at least 10 people. And another book, the Vayagid Moshe, he also quotes that you should try to have 10 men for the benching, which allows you to say not just the zimun, not just to bench together, but also to add in God's name, Elokeinu. So he suggests that. So there is this, sort of a nice idea out there. There's people who encourage you to have a minyan at your Seder. That's certainly not a halachic, requirement. He quotes that the Sfardim have very big Seders. So I guess, Sfardim are known for having large gatherings. Obviously many Ashkenazim also do too, but an Ashkenazi Seder could certainly be done with just a few people. And this year can be done with just one person. Now, that's the halachic portion of what I want to talk about. But, obviously most people are not concerned about halachically how to make sense of this. People are concerned about being lonely, missing a certain festive atmosphere at the Seder. So what insights do we have over here? So I want to share with you just a few insights, that will hopefully help make sense a little bit of what's going on this year, and to give us something to think about when we're sitting at our small Seders. So let me begin over here. Let's go back a little bit to an earlier part of the Seder, right? We've been talking about benching and Hallel up until now. So let's go back to the beginning of the Magid, at the beginning of the discussion part of the Seder, which is very much at the beginning of the whole Seder. And there we have another discussion about doing the Seder alone. And I think that will give us some insight over here. Okay, this has to do with the Manishtana, all right? And of course, the classic Manishtana, right? The Manishtana are the 4 questions that the children ask, or the youngest child asks. They ask these questions to get the Seder rolling, right? The Seder is always supposed to be done in a question and answer form. And the Seder is supposed to be a conversation between one generation to the next, between parents to children. So we have this setup, and this is the Talmud, even in the Mishnah already, the rabbis are very, very clear that this is sort of the ideal setup of the Seder. All right, it's when the children ask the parents, and the parents share with their children the story of what happened to us. Okay, so right at the beginning, the Manishtana seems to tell us that we should have a Seder, not just one person, but, there needs to be two people here. One person asks the questions, right? And there needs to be sort of a family getting together over here. All right, that's what it seems to imply. But the Talmud quotes the following, all right? And I'll read you this source, which is very relevant to this year. Tanu Rabbanan Chacham Bino Shoalo. All right, the rabbis said that if your son is wise, then he should ask you, right? We all know the wise son is one of the sons in the Haggadah, right? If your son is wise, he should ask you. V'im eino chacham, let's say your son doesn't know how to ask, all right? Your son can't ask the Manishtana. Ishto sho'alto, then his wife should ask him, all right? So your spouse should ask you. Now, what happens if you don't have kids there, you don't have a spouse there, you don't have anyone else? V'im lav hu shoel la'atzmo, then if not, you ask yourself. All right, we'll come back to this in a minute. This is a phenomenal idea. You ask yourself. Even if you have two people there who are great Torah scholars, phenomenal Torah scholars, they know all the laws of the Pesach, still shoalin zelazeh, still they should ask one to the other. Okay, so at the simplest, what this statement in the Talmud is telling us is that the Seder should always be done in a question and answer format, even if you can't do it in the traditional way. All right. In other words, we think of this as the son asking the question because he really wants to know the answer, right? He's a kid. He doesn't know the answer. And the parents then enlighten him. And that's sort of the ideal way. But the question and answer format is not actually tied in to having a little kid who doesn't know the answer. Even if you have the two greatest rabbis in the world sitting there, or even if you have two adults, you still ask each other the questions. And even if it's just you sitting there by yourself, you still ask yourself the question. All right, this is a very, very interesting source over here. And it sheds light really on what's going on in the question answer of the Seder. The question answer is a format more than more than it needs to be actually telling someone information they don't know. Okay, now, but for our purposes, what I want to reflect on this year is this line in the middle. If there's nobody there, you ask yourself. In other words, the rabbis already in the Talmud, very early on, foresaw that the people will have Seders by themselves. This isn't the first year this is happening. They saw it, and they already addressed it, and they already acknowledged it, and they said yes, and you still do the full discussion of the Seder. You still do the full Manishtana at the Seder, even if it's just by yourself. Okay, so that's something I think that's worth remembering. I don't think there's many other commandments where the rabbis go out of their way to tell us that if you're doing it by yourself, you do it in the full way. You do it in the with the regular formula. But that's what went on over here. That's what the rabbis did over here. Okay, and that's something to keep in mind. I think it should be comforting to people that are going to be at much smaller seders, maybe just themselves or one other person, but much smaller than they're used to. It's worth remembering that the rabbis knew about this, and the rabbis are encouraging us to do the full shebang. Now, and this is recorded in the Rambam also. The Rambam has the comment over here that, see if I can find it. Ein lo ben ishto shoalto, right? If you don't have a kid there, then his wife asks him, Ein lo isha shoalin zeh manishtana alayla zeh. Right? If they don't have a spouse and it's just two friends, then they ask each other. And the final case, haya levado, if you're by yourself, shoel le'atzmo manishtana halayla hazeh. So you ask yourself manishtana. So the Rambam records this halachically that if you're by yourself, then you ask yourself the question. Okay, now let me share with you one more source over here. About this same thing, okay? And that is, where did this come from? Where did the rabbis get this? So we have an unbelievable, midrash where the rabbis, interpret the Torah. We have this unbelievable comment where the rabbis tell us where did they get this notion that if you're by yourself, you still, conduct the Seder fully. So to begin this is a little technical. I'm actually not going to get into the technical parts. I just want to stay focused on reflecting on, a Seder by yourself. But the question is the following: which verse in the Torah do we derive the obligation to tell the story of the Exodus, of Yetzias Mitzrayim on the Seder night? So the Rambam says the following. The Rambam says, Mitzvah aseh shel Torah l'saper b'nisim b'niflos shenasu la'avoseinu b'Mitzrayim. There's a commandment to remember the miracles that were done in Egypt on the 15th of Nisan, right? On the Seder night, we remember it. Shenemar zochor es hayom hazeh asher yatzasem miMitzrayim. It says, remember the day that you left Egypt. Okay, zachor, remember the day. Like it says, remember the day of the Shabbos. Okay, so point number one, please remember this. The Rambam says that how do we interpret the verse, remember the day that you left Egypt? We interpret it based on the verse, remember the Shabbos. Okay, the word zachor is used in the Torah with regard to remembering the Exodus and with regard to Shabbos. So we see that in both of them, you have to remember them. Now, uminayin shebalel chamisha asar. How do you know that it's on the 15th? Talmud lomar v'higaret levincha bayom hahu. Because another verse says, tell your children on that day. So from that verse, we derive that it's on that day. Okay? So again, the Rambam derives the obligation to remember the Exodus from Zachor, remember. And from the obligation, the verse of V'higaret levincha, tell your son, he derives which day, that it's the Seder night. Okay. Now the Rambam, that's the Rambam in the laws of Pesach. The Rambam in his book of commandments quotes a phenomenal source over here, right? A Mechilta. This is the Mechilta of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. It's a little different than the standard one, so many commentators couldn't find it, but we do have it. Okay, the Mechilta says the following. It says, Ki yish'alcha bincha, when your son will ask you. So, Yachol im yishalcha bincha tamagidlo, right? That sounds like only if your son asks you. It sounds like it's only if your son asks you, then you need to tell over the story. But what happens if your son is, the one who doesn't know how to ask? So let's say your son doesn't ask you. Say the rabbis, you still should conduct the Seder fully and tell him about the Exodus. Why? Talmud lomar v'higaret levincha. It says, tell your son. Okay? V'higaret levincha means tell your son, even if he didn't ask. So the rabbis tell us, look, if your son asks, then it says when your son asks. That's one verse. Ki yishalcha bincha. But if your son doesn't ask, you still tell him, as it says, v'higaret levincha. Okay. But what happens if you don't have a son? Ein le'ala bizman sheyesh lo ben, right? What if you're by yourself? Beino levein atzmo, beino levein acherim. What if you're by yourself? What if you don't have, right? What if it's just you and other people, but your son's not there, your child's not there? So Talmud lomar vayomer Moshe al ha'am zachor es hayom hazeh. Moshe said to the people, remember this day. Rotze lomar shu tziva lezachro k'moshe amar zachor es yom haShabbos. That Moshe said to them, remember zachor, like he said, remember the Shabbos. Okay, so here the Rambam tells us something phenomenal. Okay, the verse v'higaret levincha only teaches us that you should tell the Exodus if you have your son. What if you don't have a child there? What if it's just you and other people? What if it's just you and yourself? So that's why we have the verse Zachor, remember the Exodus, which is like Zachor, remember Shabbos, which tells us that even by yourself, you should remember the Exodus. Now, the problem here is that, and again, this is the technical issue that I'm not going to touch on, but the Rambam in one place said we derived the obligation from Zachor, right? And we derived the date from V'higareta. And in the other place, he said we derived the obligation from V'higareta, and we derive, even if you're by yourself, from Zachor. So there seems to be some contradiction which verse we derive it from. And the commentators go on at length to make sense of that. Okay, but the other thing the commentators are all bothered by is this Shabbos. What are we learning out from Shabbos, right? Who cares that it says Zachor on Shabbos and it says it on at the Exodus? Who cares? So the idea over here, and there's various ideas to make sense of it, but what I want to share with you right now is that the Rambam seems to imply And again, there's other ways to read this, but some commentators understand that the Rambam is implying that there's a mitzvah of v'higarat lebincha. There's a commandment to tell your son. And that includes maybe telling other people. It includes a normal year where we get together with other people and we tell the story and someone asks us a question and we answer it. A normal year is derived from that verse. But then there's years where we are by ourselves, where we do a Seder by ourselves. And that we derive from a whole other verse from Zachor. Remember, even if you're by yourself, says the Torah. So the rabbis are interpreting the Torah to be saying, even in a year when no one else is there, we still have to remember the Exodus. We have to do the Seder fully. And I saw in the Tzitz Eliezer, he explains that that's what the Rambam was comparing it to Shabbos. In other words, what are we learning out from Shabbos? There's many opinions, but he says we're learning out from Shabbos that even if you're by yourself for Shabbos, you celebrate Shabbos, you make Kiddush, you do everything normal, right? Shabbos is regular, even when you're by yourself. And so too says the Rambam that we derive from Pesach, that even by yourself, we should do a Pesach the same way we do it every year. So this, I think, is a very important point. You know, we talk a lot about the connection between Shabbos and Pesach, and the fullest realization of that connection between Shabbos and Pesach is going to be those people who do a Seder by themselves. It's something really remarkable to think about. You know, those people who are going to do a Seder by themselves, you know, obviously there's a loneliness, there's something upsetting about it, but they should also realize that they are commemorating the relationship between Shabbos and Pesach in the fullest way, in a way that most of us, you know, we've never seen before. Most of us have never had a Pesach like that. You know, many people have never really fully embraced that connection between Pesach and Shabbos. And I'll even add that the rabbis read this as saying that the Torah itself is telling us that if we do a Seder by ourselves, it's a special commandment of Zachor. And, you know, many of us have never done that, the special commandment. According to this reading, many of us have never seen it. And it is an opportunity that people are going to have this year to be able to fully observe that commandment of the Zachor. You know, and I'll end off that I was looking through many Haggadahs to see what they say on this, you know, on this special comment, on this rabbinic reading that the Torah is telling us that even alone we should do the Seder. And I noticed there aren't that many reflections. You know, there isn't that much insight. People haven't written at length about this. And I think that's because, you know, it's not that common. It's something we really try to avoid if we can. And I think a lot of authors haven't thought about it. But this year I see, you know, people are starting to think about it. What does it mean a Seder by ourselves? And even though it's not something we try to do, it's not something we'll hopefully have to do in other years. It's something that we try to avoid our best on a regular year. But there is a profound meaning in it, which is that someone is saying, first of all, they're observing the mitzvah of Zachor in a way that they may never have done before. They're celebrating this connection between Shabbos and Pesach in a way that also, you know, they may never have done before. But ideologically, what they're saying is that we don't just do Pesach because it's a fun family time. It's a way to get together. You know, the conversation's good. It's intriguing. It's stimulating. It's intellectually fulfilling. That's not why we do Pesach. We do Pesach to remind ourselves, to remind the world, to be able to remind all future generations of Jews, to remind our generation that God took us out of Egypt and that we are forever more connected with him. And even though Pesach is a time of guests usually, but this year we're going to be highlighting another part of Pesach, which is that there are very important parts of Pesach without guests. You know, and I hope that we'll be able, even in our small Seders, you know, one or two people or you know, whatever the number is, but that we'll be able to embrace the opportunity, the specialness of this year, you know, so that in coming years, hopefully very soon when we're getting together and in coming Seders when we all are back to our big groups, so we'll still take those lessons and we'll still remember some of the things that we think about this year. All right. Thank you all for joining us. You know, for an unusual Shabbos Hagadol drasha, for an unusual year. And stay safe, please. And we'll hope to see everyone soon in person. Have a great Pesach, everyone.